Hey guys, Saxomatic Uncertainty here, and I'm back with another video. I just tried to record this, and unfortunately I lost the footage about halfway through. I accidentally stopped the recording, so I am redoing it. And yeah, so between the tutorials, the only thing I've done just to, make this a little bit quicker is I've equipped this box collider and rigid body. The box collider is just so that we have a little object in the scene to demo this with, and then obviously we need a rigid body because we're going to be trying out, throwing mechanics as opposed to simply, grabbing and dropping objects. So we're going to be doing this without any prefabs, as is traditional in my tutorials. I like to, keep things clean and not do too much of that kind of, pre-made stuff. So the only thing I've also changed is I've made these both into triggers. So I've added colliders and turned each controller into a trigger. And what this will do is they won't interact physically with the environment, but we'll be able to use two specific methods that will allow us to do grabbing very easily and to get this thing working pretty quickly. So we're going to start off with this grab script. That's actually going to be the majority of the tutorial, is just going to be getting the grabbing itself working, and then throwing will be at the very end. It'll be pretty easy to get working after we have all this done. And we're going to put this on our left hand. We will implement the right hand and snapping and distance grabbing in the next video, I think. But for now, we're going to be working on just getting the grabbing mechanic itself working with, from scratch CS. So let's just open this up, okay? And we can delete this start method. We're not actually going to need that. I don't know. There we go. And now I'm going to take you to this documentation here. So you can see we have an onTriggerEnter method, and this is why I made these triggers. So now that they're triggers, we can use this method. And what this does is when a collider enters our trigger, we're going to be able to receive a message from this method indicating that, and we'll be able to then interact with that collider and by extension its game object. So we're going to go into Unity and we're going to add that method. So we're going to say void on trigger enter collider pull, and we'll add another void on trigger exit collider pull. And now that we have those method headers, we'll be able to actually write the method bodies, which are going to be very short and to the point. So up here, I want to add a list. And this list is going to be a list of game objects that are currently within the grabbing area of the controller. So we'll call this list objects. And actually, we'll need to instantiate this list. Now that we've declared that, what we're going to be able to do is whenever an object enters the trigger, we will add it to this list, and whenever it exits, we'll remove it. And so we will always be able to know which objects are within the area of this and figure out, if we can grab it or not. And then we'll set up the grabbing methods in the update section. So when an object enters, we want to say objects dot add game object, and this will give us the game object instance to which this collider is attached. And then whenever something exits, since we know that if it's exiting it has to have entered, we can say objects.remove game object. And now we'll go into our update method and start working with the objects in this, list of objects. So we're going to write an if statement. We're going to say if OVRInput dot get, and then we're going to say OVRInput dot raw button, right? And this will let us get any button on here that we want, and we'll say L hand trigger. And this will just let us use the trigger on the controller. And then we'll say for each object in the array, right? Because we now have determined that the player is trying to grab something. We're going to get an instance of the object, right? So game object go in objects. So for each of the objects that we can potentially grab, we're going to now grab the object. So first, we're going to set this object to be the parent of that object. So go.transform.parent equals transform, so this object's transform. And then we're going to check if it has a rigid body. So we're going to say if go.getComponents rigid body, and if it does have a rigid body, we're going to say rigid body RB equals go.getComponent rigid body, and we will just interact with this now. So we'll say rb.isKinematic equals true. This will disable things like momentum, and basically a lot of the properties that these objects tend to have, and it'll just make the object behave less like a physics object. And then we'll also disable gravity. So rb.useGravity equals false. I think this may be superfluous. I'm not sure. I can't remember if kinematic is also an inhibitor of gravity, but either way. And then we're going to have an else statement for if you're not pressing down the trigger. And if you aren't, we're going to let go of all the objects. So we'll say for each object, right? So the same loop that we just wrote a second ago. For each game object go in objects, we will say actually in this case, my apologies, outside of this, we're first going to say, actually, here, I don't know why I'm fooling around with the order so much, but I feel like it is better to do it this way. Transform, right, so this object's transform will detach all the children in a moment. And what this will do is it will remove all of these objects from the transform of this current, hand. And so then they'll no longer be held in the grip of that hand. And then for each object, again, we're going to check if it has a rigid body. So if go.getComponent rigid body, rigid body RB equals go.getComponents rigid body RB that is kinematic equals false. RB.useGravity equals true. And that will fix everything. So now we're just going to test that all this stuff is working. Again, it may not be. There is that chance that I missed something while I was writing this just now. But we're going to hope that it's all working. And if it is, we're going to move on to throwing objects, which will not take us more than a few moments to implement. So you can see we're now in the game, and I can grab this object with the index. So you can see this here. I'm trying to point to it, right there. I'm tapping it right now. That button, not the back one. That's the 1D axis if you want to use that. And you can see the only problem is, no matter what my momentum is, this thing just falls. straight down. So I can release it going up, and it's just going to fall exactly down. And we have no control over it past, being able to hold it. The moment we release it, it's just going to fall as if it has no momentum because, since we set it to be kinematic, it doesn't have any momentum. So the moment we let go of it, and we're going to write this right now, we want to add a velocity to it that is equivalent to the velocity of the controller. And in order to do this, we're going to go down here and we're going to say if, or sorry, not if, I don't know what I was thinking. We're going to go down here into this release statement. So if we're releasing the object, actually, I was going to do this later on, but we need to do this now. We're going to change this to be an else if statement now. And the reason for this is that we need to know if the person is holding the object at that moment. So we're going to set a bool holding, is holding equals false initially. But if they have this set up like this, we're going to say is holding equals true. So if they've grabbed something, then that's going to be the case. And we also want to say if not is holding, right? Because we don't want them to be able to pick things up while they're already holding something in their hand, right? We want them to have to grab again, right? Because if their hand is already closed on an object or some objects, we don't want them to be able to do that again and say, oh, I can pick up however many things I want. That doesn't really make a ton of sense. And then here we'll say if is holding, right? So if they are holding it, and not this, right? So this is why we're adding this bit. So if they're holding it, and on top of that, if they are not pressing down on this trigger, we want to release everything. And this is important because if this is not set up, objects are going to be really sticky almost, because we're going to be, in this case, setting things up to be thrown. And there's just a bug that occurs with that. I can get into that in the comments if you want to know more about that, but it should be pretty logical now that you know that it exists. So what we're going to do is we're going to say rb.useGravity, and right after this we'll say rb.velocity, right? Since it has no velocity right now, we're going to set the velocity equal to OVRInput.get local controller velocity. Or actually, I think you can just get the controller velocity, locally. And we're going to say OVRInput.get. Or sorry, OVR, I don't know what I'm doing. OVRInput.controller.ltouch in this case, right? Because we're using the left hand, we want to be able to get the velocity for the left controller. And now that we've changed this, if we come into our script and try this out, hopefully everything will be working and we'll be able to throw objects. So I'm just going to have the controllers. Though I only really need the left one. You can see I can grab the object still, but now if I let go of it, it does sort of throw, I don't know. That's the problem. Okay, give me 1 sec. I'm going to fix this for you guys really quickly, just so that I don't leave you with any bugs. But down here, this is very, very simple, but I might have missed it had I not tried that out. We need to, after this has started, set is holding to false, because this part is never going to run again, and we're always going to be evaluating to false, or in the other case to true, and that means that we're never really going to let go of objects, which is obviously not wanted. And now if I go back in here, you should see that the block will now respond to my movement so you can see I can throw it. I can't really catch it very well, but I can in fact throw it, and there you saw I caught it. It looks a little bit weird, and I'm not sure what that was. I'll try to figure out why that just stopped there. Oh, that collider is way too large. Either way, yeah, see there's some kind of a bug there. There's some kind of bug that's occasionally causing it to just not interact, and then you saw because I used a plane, it just fell through the world. But you can see now we can throw objects and interact with them in a better way. And this tutorial, while it's not the most polished thing in the world, is really about doing this from scratch so you have a better understanding of the way in which a lot of these things actually work, so you get a better understanding of programming. Because I think a lot of the tutorials out there right now are just sort of kind of like plug and play, and I don't think there's a lot of value to that. So I'm trying to sort of help people do this stuff without the prefabs, so that when they want to do something that's never been done before, they don't say, oh, there's no prefab for that, I don't really know what to do. So I hope this helps you get a better foundation for programming things with VR. And if it did, remember to leave a like, comment if you have any suggestions for future videos or if you have any feedback, and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this in the future. As always, stay tuned for the next video, and yeah, bye guys.